a lot of approvals and production since 2009, and we are, by my reading, lower than we have been on that graph since 2009, which is as far back as the graph goes. So that, I suppose, stood out to me and as a red flag. Would you mind talking around that, and as well our goals and how we meet them? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor, for the question, and through the Chair. And I'll speak in general terms because we often get information through third parties, so it might be, say, the real estate industry or developers, etc. So we sort of have some anecdotal information around what may be happening. Traditionally, this is a reasonably quiet period for planning and development. However, this is particularly quiet even for Toowoomba Regional Council. I think some of the numbers that we're seeing here, and I was speaking to my Manager of Development, Infrastructure and Growth, Adam, this morning, and we were talking about, so some of the numbers that we're seeing here are sort of pre-COVID numbers, sort of 2019, and we are certainly seeing some declines. Other areas in southeast Queensland, for example, Gold Coast, are also seeing some significant declines. It could be that it's due to a range of factors, and this may answer several questions this morning. It could be that borrowing capacity of home builders is, I think it's been reduced by up to a third in some cases. So I think the real estate industry is reporting that people are going back where they've got plans to build, and they're cutting rooms off houses so that they can afford it. It could be that we're still seeing those really high numbers in terms of supplies, whether it's concrete or sand or those types of things. So it's still very expensive to build. There are other developments that are in the pipelines where we've got a skills and trade shortage, as well as the borrowing capacity for some developers. So I think it's a range of things. So anecdotally, I would say there are a range of things in play. We will keep our communication open with the development industry, and also whether it's real estate or the community, just to see what else may be happening. And that's probably the best way that we can stay ahead of the curve. We've got really good relationships with UDIA, DIRG, which is the Development Industry Reference Group, etc. So they tend to keep us well informed of any issues that they're seeing, as do real estate, economic development, etc. So we're happy to sort of keep council informed as information becomes available to us. It is particularly relevant for us when we're looking at those growth numbers that we'll be seeking to achieve with the SEQ plan. And as the Chair is aware, you know, we meet with the Chair in our portfolio leave with UDIA, and we're sort of discussing measures that we can introduce that would be of assistance in encouraging housing.
Thank you for the answer, and I appreciate your points. It's multifaceted and complex, and we're not the only one. So in those conversations with UDIA, keeping that they have probably seen this data too, they're happy with otherwise everything that council's doing around land supply and those kind of questions?
Yes, so working with UDIA and also DIRG, I think we're providing greater clarity in things like our policies, such as the build over sewer, trees, those types of things. So that's always useful when council has a really strong position that's well understood in relation to building and development. And then we will look at, obviously we'll be coming back to you with information about our submission to the SEQ regional plan. So we're currently looking at a range of things that we can do in that regard to try and meet those targets.
Councillor Shine?
Yeah, no, thanks, Chair. Similar question, but refer councillors to page 21, which is the graph 11. It sort of indicates to me, well, it indicates itself that there is a decline going back a number of years, a couple of years. Anyway, I don't know what preceded July 21. And I just wonder if there's something more peculiar to Toowoomba, or the way we have done business over that period of time that might be contributing to that decline from what was it, around about 50,000 down to 36, 7,000 or something like that. When you look at the graph there, I understand the recent issues with the shortage of materials and labour, but we're not too sure that was the case in 21 and early 22. Might have been, but if there is anything that we can do that's within our own power, then obviously you're keen to address it, I would have thought. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and through the chair. And this was actually a topic that we discussed yesterday with UDIA. It might have been, actually, Adam provided a graph to you a couple of weeks ago which showed, and I think it went back to pre-2015, and it showed the numbers of units versus detached dwellings. So I think if for this graph we showed, say, back to 2018, you might see that those numbers were a little bit lower pre-2021. Actually, Adam's probably got some further information that can be provided.
Thanks, Adam.
So, so Dr. Stepanov's right that earliest part is July 21. So that was peak home builder. So if we go back to early 2020, like, we were super quiet. There was a lot of lots not being sold. So I think Avenues was selling about one a month. Home builder got announced, I think it was mid-2020, I can't remember the exact month now. And he sold all 60 lots he had available, or something like that, within a weekend. So we went from completely dead through to a peak period. That would have been fairly close to a historical peak in that early period, but it still is that trend of falling off. While there's still fairly high demand, that's what's more concerning to me, is we know that there's a lot of people out there wanting to build houses, but we still have that falling trend. The lot production numbers aren't as high as what, in my view, is they should be. There's a lot being in the construction phase that are just not coming out that back end of them. A lot of that's to do with trade issues, like having issues getting retaining wall builders, pipes, etc. It's just blowing out a lot of construction timeframes. In saying that, it'd be, if we talk to UDIA, they'd like to see more approvals hitting the ground as well. So I think it's quite multifaceted in that regard. It's not just one thing, but that graph's probably in some regards a little bit misleading. If it was over twice the period, you'd see it goes up to that point and then down. So
I was wondering what did precede, and that's a good reminder, because it was exceptionally quiet there a few years ago. But in terms of what's causing it now, I'm sure there's a willingness on part of planning to do whatever we can to change that, but obviously you're very conscious of it and appreciate it. Thank you.
Councillor Melissa Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report, and I don't know if this is a little bit off topic, but I think very relevant to where we are heading. We've been talking the last couple of weeks about population growth and detached and attached housing that we need over the next couple of decades. But it was an interesting point yesterday. Councillor James and I went to the tourism conversation over at the Oaks, and they were saying that by 2032, Toowoomba will need an extra 900 nights or 900 accommodation rooms by 2032. And to me, the housing links in with that, because if we don't have the housing, a lot of the housing that we do have will be used for Airbnb because we don't have hotel accommodation. So therefore, the rental market is shrunk. It's also interlinked, and you know this really worries me when there's a drop like this as to how is that going to affect housing for our community, rentals for our community, and are they being taken up by Airbnb or short-term accommodation because we don't have hotel accommodation for events, etc. So it's also interlinked, and I was really worried, and I think the stat was the region requires 1,500 extra rooms for accommodation rooms, but Toowoomba itself needs 900 extra by 2032.
Thank you. And look, certainly there's a shortage of short stay accommodation, and there's also a shortage of the longer term accommodation that a renter would generally seek. So we're facing that issue on both fronts, and it's really important that we address both issues, whether that's encouraging more to come to town to build short stay accommodation rather than putting houses available for Airbnb, so it could be hotels, etc. And then also addressing the issues with the general shortage of accommodation. I think the interest rates have impacted, so people that would ordinarily be looking to buy a family home, they've had their borrowing capacity cut, which means they're looking in different suburbs, looking for smaller homes. It could be that they hold off thinking they might wait until the interest rates come back down. So we're seeing a range of factors hitting people in different ways. I think what's interesting about this particular graph is just the effect of that home building initiative at that time, and you can see it had a very positive effect. But you know, potentially without that kind of interference in the market, it may be very difficult to sort of achieve those levels again, but we're sort of looking at a range of things that might work, and I'm sure the state government and federal government are looking at a range of factors as well. Yeah.
Any further questions? No? Can I have someone move that the report of the General Manager, Planning and Development Group on the regional development statistics for July 2023 be noted by Council? Councillor Carl, Councillor Carol Taylor, all those in favour? It's carried. Thank you. Now I need someone to move that we go into confidential. Our next item is item number 5, and it is a confidential matter. Councillor McMahon, Councillor Melissa Taylor, all those in favour? Beg your pardon? Why we're going into confidential? Legal and commercial in confidence. Oh, here we are. That's it's just in the report there. So legal advice obtained by the local government or legal proceedings involving the local government, including, for example, legal proceedings that may be taken by or against the local government, and negotiations relating to a commercial matter involving the local government for which a public discussion would likely to prejudice the interests of the local government of Local Government Regulation 2012. So all those in favour, moving into confidential, that's carried. Thank you. Now the gallery will have to Nancy's daughter with the being the EA. Okay. Hang on. Welcome back, everyone. Now, item number 5 is the confidential matter of 390 Drayton Wellcamp Road. So the recommendation is that council authorise the CEO to enter an infrastructure agreement with Glenvale Divine Road Development Pty Ltd, which includes standard commercial terms and a stage payment capped at $4 million, subject to budget review, for transfer of completed trunk infrastructure assets, being conditional on clear title transfer to council. Can I have someone move that recommendation, please? Councillor Nancy Summerfield, Councillor Carol Taylor, all those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Item number 6 is the Interlink SQ matter, and the recommendation... Oh, beg your pardon, Councillor Carl, did you...
Yeah, Madam Chair, I raised this the other day with councillors, but in a statutory formal meeting, I'd like to raise it again and test the room. I don't believe the connection is relevant, but however, my related parties register. My daughter is I'm conscious of my daughter's position, so she works directly for one of the let me go to the involved parties here. Yeah, it's completely in the university, in a university role. She, in her employment position there, works for one of the proponents, and I don't believe the link is direct, and I don't believe the proponent or the involved party here would be in the business of or discussing their other business matters. But however, I think it was just wise to let councillors know that my daughter works for one of these involved parties in another role.
So, Councillor, are you
Just to test the room, I guess.
testing the room? Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor Carroll?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The university is a big organisation, and I don't believe, as Councillor Carl has said, that that there would be any mention of this business. There's so much university. I don't think there's anything to be gained or lost by Councillor Carl staying in the room, because there's no direct link to any type of, I would believe, any information of any kind pertaining to this issue. Thank you.
Are you moving that? I'm moving that Councillor Carl be...
Yeah, it is formal, yes, and I am moving that I don't believe that Councillor Carl has anything, that Councillor Carl does have any kind of a type of a conflict of interest in this matter.
So Councillor Taylor has moved that. Do we have a seconder for that recommendation?
No, I'm happy to second it when the time comes, Madam Chair. I just wonder whether that sentence is right. When the related parties register, my daughter works directly for one of the university roles, works for one of the proponents.
No, it doesn't sound right.
Sorry, yeah. Sorry, Wendy. My daughter works for one of the involved party members on this item of business for Interlink SQ, but however works for one of that member in a university role, nothing to do with Interlink SQ. it's removed. But because my daughter is obviously on a related parties register, and there is a link to one of those members, that's why I raised it. I mean, it's a far cry to think that there would be any relationship whatsoever from a business point of view from that person divulging anything to my daughter in her role at the university. It's totally separate. But I raised it the other day, and this is a statutory forum, councillors didn't think so then, but it's the right thing to do today.
I guess the question would be, Councillor Carl, how closely does your daughter work with one of the proponents?
In another role.
Well, she's the EA of one of the proponents. However, that is in a university role, has nothing to do with Interlink SQ, and I think it would be preposterous to think that that same person would discuss any of that business with my daughter as a university EA for that person. I'm just raising it out of probably best practice around governance to inform my colleagues that my daughter has a link in another role with that person.
Sorry, Dr. Nicola, you said something to me before, and I'm sorry, I missed it. Was it something that you thought was incorrect there? Or?
Thank you. So, Councillor Bill, so your daughter is an ordinary employee of the university?
Yes. Which, and I stress again, has nothing to do with Interlink SQ. Yeah.
So, Councillor Carol Taylor has moved that.
Just there's two entities named here, so I'm not sure that you need to name Interlink in there. It's still very messy to me, but I mean that can be tidied up.
Yeah.
Should it be, as my daughter is on my related parties register, and she works directly for one of the...
As executive assistant to an involved
one
party.
of the proponents.
But it's only in the university employment area.
It's very little. No, I think that's a bit detailed, isn't it? I'm just making a broad declaration that my daughter works for one of these members on the involved party of this application in another capacity, nothing to do with Interlink.
In his
other capacity at
as
the
Chancellor
university.
Of the university.
That's probably about it.
No, but it's too many. It's too
No.
much. It's just.
Well, I'm open to
her
some
employer is
direction
the
here,
university.
Bailey, but yeah,
It's very
I
messy.
that's why and apologies, councillors, I didn't sort of think to.
We've got a little bit
needed
of
to raise it, but anyway.
wordsmithing here.
My comments, take them or leave them. Councillor Cahill disclosed his daughter works for the university, for which one of the members of the application is also employed.
I think it's a closer relationship than that, though.
Well, they share the same employer.
So, Councillor Megan, are you suggesting? I'm happy to step out if you're suggesting I have a conflict.
Councillor Bill, all I'm asking is, do we know that this person doesn't disclose any information to the...
Well, then you're questioning the integrity of my daughter as well. And if that was the unlikely event that this person would actually divulge anything to do with my daughter as an EA in a university role, which is distinctly separate from this matter we're dealing with here. So
that's a decision
look,
for
I'm
you to
happy to
make.
step out,
I'm
but I
asking you a question.
take objection to those inferences.
I thought that this was the whole process, that we got to ask each other the questions
No,
without fear or judgment.
Well, ask a direct question instead of implying, please. If you think, are you asking me that, or are you saying you think I have a conflict? Because if you do, I'm happy to step out.
I guess I don't know. There's a clear answer to that, sorry. Yeah.
Make a comment here. The Chancellor of the USQ and in Naomi's role there, it's a huge organisation. This organisation has a CEO or executive manager or something else. It'd be very, very unlikely. I mean, the business of the university is almost as big as the council. So find it very unusual if there should even be any mention of that there. So, and I would not think that you would mention any business issues to your EA, because his or her job is to look after your role in that particular organisation. So that's a comment I'd like to make. Thank you.
Okay.
Perhaps it might help just to leave what you had at the start. Related parties register. My daughter works directly for one of the involved party members in an organisation separate to this item. And full stop.
I might just correct that. So the daughter actually works for the university.
Yes.
She's in a support role for another employee of the university, but they both work for the university. Yeah. So she doesn't work directly for that party.
You happy with that, Councillor Carr?
It's like Daily, does that read all right?
I would suggest related party. My daughter works in an ordinary as an ordinary employee for the university, and in that capacity is in a support role directly for one of those involved. It could be something because ultimately she's not his employee.
Councillor Carl, you.
I don't know, which line am I reading?
My daughter works as an ordinary employee.
Of the university.
Of UniSQ, because we're talking about this particular university.
In the capacity
that's-
of a.
That covers it?
And probably just finish after one of the involved parties.
No, I'm happy with that. Has you got that, Wendy? Thank you.
Okay. All right. Councillor Carroll has moved that, and
Firmly believe, Madam Chair, that there will be no cross the station.
and the Mayor has seconded. So, all those in favour? All right. So, item number 6, the recommendation is that Council resolve to uphold the waiver arrangements for the changed warehouse use and recognise and waive the amended infrastructure charges notice of $162,686.02 in a deed of variation, and number 2, endorse the extension of the delivery of work by 2 years from the due date for the lodgement of the operational works applications. Can I have someone to move that? Councillor Carol Taylor, seconded. The Mayor. All those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. And that is the end of the Planning and Development meeting. Thank you. Thanks.
Right, councillors, welcome to the Water and Waste Committee meeting for September 2023. This meeting is open to the public and will also be live streamed. I'd like to thank those of you who are in the room with us today and anybody who's watching online. I'd like to acknowledge Portfolio Lead Councillor Summerfield, the Mayor. We've got General Manager Platts. We did have the CEO, but his tea's here, so I suppose he's coming back. And we do have a large number of staff here, so thank you very much, council officers. I acknowledge the Aboriginal parties whose song lines traverse these lands we meet on today, the Western Waka Waka, Guyabul and Jarowair people, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. Item number 2, we go to attendance, including apologies, leave of absence and declarations of conflict of interest. I don't have any declarations of conflict of interest, but if anything comes up, please just raise those. And we have no apologies advised, and we don't require any leave of absence to note. We go to item number 3. This is the water infrastructure policy and the wastewater infrastructure policy, so water infrastructure policy 2.03 and wastewater infrastructure policy 2.04. And we have Phil McEwen here who is going to talk us through that report. Over to you. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, councillors. Brought this to you in an information session a few weeks ago, and at that time you requested that we do some further consultation with the industry body. We've since spoken to the UDIA, who have been very, very helpful in running through some of this and clarifying some points for us, also bringing forth some issues that we will need to consider going forward as well. So that was very, very useful. The purpose of the report is to inform Council about the review that has been undertaken of the 2 policies and the associated documents. So the first is the water infrastructure policy and the associated documents, Toowoomba Regional Council submetering guidelines and specs, the Toowoomba Regional Council addendum to the Water Supply Code of Australia, Water Services Association of Australia, which is the submetering code, and Water Services Association of Australia Water Supply Code. The other policy is the wastewater infrastructure policy, and the documents that it references are the Toowoomba Regional Council addendum to the Gravity Sewerage Code of Australia, the Water Services Association Conduit Inspection Reporting Code, so CCTV, etc., and the Water Services Association of Australia Gravity Sewerage Code of Australia. These documents provide a framework to guide new and existing water and wastewater infrastructure works within Toowoomba, and these documents were last reviewed in 2018. And they're on a 5-year cycle. So they are currently due. The Water Infrastructure Services Branch has undertaken a review of the policies and their associated addendums and codes of practice, and included stakeholder feedback to ensure that the review was thorough of these existing policies. The amendments identified were inclusion of a standard drawing for hydrant and valve markers, standard specification for supply and install of hydrant and valve covers and their surrounds, and clarification of details surrounding separation between infrastructure, which I will go into a little further after our discussions with UDIA. On the sewer policy, we had the revision of the build-over sewer requirements to clarify process, improve readability. That is one of the areas that the UDIA has suggested looking forward to in the future, where we are starting to look into heavy brownfields infill and where we might need to go with build-over sewer once we arrive at that situation. It was excellent feedback and something we definitely need to look into. Inclusion of a standard specification for undertaking CCTV inspections of the council sewer networks. We have had developers doing that for some time now. They do the on-maintenance inspections, but we now have the a formal specification on what they need to look for, how they need to carry them out. Addition of a standard drawing for inclusion of sewer connection points on properties, which we did not have. The recommendation is that council adopt the updated 2003 water infrastructure policy and related addendums and codes of practice, and the updated 2.04 wastewater infrastructure policy and its related addendums and codes of practice. And the reasons for the recommendation is that the adoption of the recommended changes to the policies and their associated addenda documents and industry standards has been made to introduce more flexibility into a number of areas in which we deal with the developers, while also providing clarity in decision making and consistency in our requirements for council and industry, which will ensure that council's water and wastewater network upgrades are in line with industry standards and continue to support development and growth in the Toowoomba region. As an addition to that, as I said, we spoke to UDIA, which is the Development Institute here in Toowoomba. A number of the issues they brought up, we have definitely incorporated into the policy as it stands now. We actually left a clause out, which should have been there in the first instance, which they very kindly picked up for us, which was very good. Clearance from infrastructure, as I mentioned, was one of the issues. That was clearance from footpaths and the connotations that that may have in terms of having sewage lines on the verge or utilities in the verge with trees and gas and so on and so forth in the future. As I mentioned, some of the build over sewer going forward for infill development. So while we did adopt a number of their recommendations, we've also taken a number under advisement for future investigation to look at incorporating in the policy potentially before the next revision if it becomes an issue before that time. So that's the paper as it stands.
Okay, councillors, thank you. And thank you for that, Phil. I've got Councillor Summerfield and then Councillor Shine.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for that, Phil. And I note on the policies, they're actually for review every 3 years, and we're now it's 6 years since there's been a review. I just wondered, in relation to the feedback from UDIA, you mentioned that some have been implemented and some are going to be investigated. I just wonder, can you give me some idea of how many were included in these policies and how many are going to be investigated, please?
The recommendations, Councillor, from UDIA were with regard to water mains being 500 clear of footpaths. That is something that they sought clarity, recognising that water mains will have to actually cross footpaths. So there was where the water main came at perpendicular to the footpath, obviously it can't remain 500 clear of the footpath. And we had actually neglected to clarify that point. So that's obviously been incorporated. That was a bit of a no-brainer, quite frankly. The second one was retaining the baseline clarity for Class 1A dwelling owners that replacement or relocation will be TRC work and cost responsibility. That was the clause that we actually omitted, and that's been put back in. Positioning new build over sewer clauses as a subset, so that was just a reformatting of the policy. Again, a no-brainer. Single or split level and multi-storey Class 1A buildings to be recognised as same for build over sewer assessments. What they're basically asking for is 2-storey buildings to allow to be built over sewer. That's one we've taken under advisement to investigate further. It's not that we're saying no, we just need to look into it. And it's one, as I mentioned with infill development, that is one we are definitely going to encounter in the near future. So we need to get our heads around that. So that one's under consideration. Additional to that, there was replacement or realignment of sewers to be addressed at the RAL stage. That requires discussion with development planning because that's actually subject to legislation. It would be a great outcome for everybody if we could do it. Current legislation doesn't actually allow us. It would mean we can consider those issues much earlier in the planning process, which would be awesome. However, that's something that planning are aware of, and I've been talking to Adam about that over the last little while. We specify, well, we don't specify, we have a condition of trying to maintain our sewer manholes at 4 metre maximum depth, or even our sewers at 4 metre maximum, for workplace health and safety issues, for accessibility and maintenance issues. We're getting to a point where, let's be honest, a lot of the country that remains to be developed is very hilly around Toowoomba, and sometimes that is going to need sewers to be a bit deeper. So we're talking to them, to UDIA, about what sort of measures can be put in place to make access and maintenance to those sewers if they do go deeper. Again, one that's under consideration. Another one that we have incorporated, or is going to be incorporated more as a practice note, it's not actually a policy item, is 1.5 metre clearance to sewer mains when you're putting it under a retaining wall. Basically, your average retaining wall has about 2.4 metre span normally. We're asking at this point in time that they push it out to a 3 metre span, which creates some structural issues. Don't have a real problem with that, so we're actually looking at bringing that back to 1.2 metres, so that you are talking the 2 metre span, 2.4 metre span, with some structural design arrangements around it for protection of the pipeline. The discussion we're having there, and as I say, this is not a policy thing, this is an operational maintenance thing, is making sure that we can access the pipeline when we need to. But that, we don't have a real issue with that one either. So that one's been taken on board as well. The other one, and this is a very much a future one, and you have been talking to development planning this morning. Going forward, we realise that there's every chance that blocks of land will get smaller. You've only got to look to Brisbane, where they have 400 square metre blocks of land. The house takes up the whole block. There is no room for services, as we currently do it, of running a sewer line at the back of the property. So it may be that in the future we actually have to run our sewer lines in the verge, out the front of the property. So that was another one they brought up that obviously is for future contemplation. That's the list, Councillor. That is the full list.
Thanks, Bill. I appreciate that. So, you know, with the verge, as you were saying, are there complications for us? Is there any reason why?
Yes.
The trees,
it will certainly need consideration, and you've got your tree policy, you've got your footpaths, you've got gas, you've got your telcos, you've got electricity, all of which are going underground these days, and of course water. So things start to get a little bit tight.
So it could possibly depend on the width of specific footpaths, couldn't it?
Correct. There may be a discussion there that the footpath has to be a little bit wider.
Yeah, okay.
But again, that's a future thing that is going to take some consideration with development planning.
Yeah. So just, sorry if I can, thank you. So, and I can't remember where it was now, but in there somewhere there was talk about, you know, you could do this under such and such a circumstance, and then should it be different to that, council will make a decision about whether we approve it or not.
Is that built over sewer?
I think it was. Okay. Sorry, Phil, I'm
no,
just putting you on the
fine.
spot there.
Yeah, that's fine. Sorry, Councillor.
My only thought with that was, unless you've got a fact sheet for staff to look at, to deliberate on their decision making, you're getting personal bias and there's nothing wrong with personal bias, we've all got it. You're getting personal bias on someone who's making an assessment unless you've got a fact sheet there for them to do, tick, yes, it meets that, tick, it meets that. Does that make sense? I'm just wondering whether you do have those for those sort of circumstances.
We do. It's set out in the standards that I quoted. We have to adhere to those standards. What has happened in the past is that there's been quite a hard line taken on build over sewer. And given where we were at that stage of development in Toowoomba, that wasn't necessarily the wrong thing. We are now entering a phase where we are starting to look at a lot more infill development, and that means that build over sewer is going to happen a lot more often. And it may be that there is not the opportunity to relocate the sewer, etc.
Yeah.
So we're looking now more for brownfields that we take risk into account. And we discussed in the chamber here last time about the one for Cramptons, where all we had upstream was a toilet block. So build over sewer in that case obviously doesn't carry a high risk.
No.
We've had
One
others where
toilet.
there's only been 3 or 4 houses upstream. We've had others where there's 3,000 houses upstream. So that's now a factor in our discussions as well,
Good.
which in the past has been stop, do not pass go, do not collect $200. So yes, the situation in the policy is now that we've actually set out the hierarchy that must be considered by the developer before we reach build over sewer. So we've said, let's talk about relocation. Let's talk about diversion of the flow into another catchment, which isn't always possible, of course. In fact, it's very rarely possible, unfortunately. And when we reach build over sewer, then it just becomes a discussion about structural protection of the pipeline. So there's actually a hierarchy of consideration now.
Yeah.
And if they give us the documentation showing they've considered that and they've reached this, all
Yep.
is good.
And of course, costs need to be taken into consideration there. I mean, if it was extraordinarily high to have to do an alternative thing in that hierarchy before you actually did a build over sewer, that would have to be considered as well.
That is considered, yes.
So Phil, I really just want to be reassured that what we've catered for in the build over sewer area particularly, but policy generally, is in line with other councils.
We did some research, councillor. Cairns City Council or Cairns Regional Council, they do not allow build over sewer full stop at all. You do not build over sewer. That is there. The only place that you can build over sewer is retaining walls or a deck or something like that.
Which was us until recently too.
Well, we've always allowed single story to build over. And that's why we're considering the infill, because let's be honest, that'll be things like 2-story townhouses will be the bulk of the infill. So
Yeah.
we're considering.
So
what we
other
do with that.
councils?
Mackay City Council is very similar to us. They have a hierarchy. The developers have to actually provide a full report of what they have considered before they reach build over sewer, signed off by an RPEQ. That's actually something we're thinking too. That would certainly, if they've got a report that details all their considerations, then that's going to make a decision-making process quite easy. I did bring that up at UDIA yesterday, and they weren't opposed. It certainly gives us something that we can then sit down and discuss properly, because we've got all the information in front of us. In Brisbane, with urban utilities, it's developed to the point where they don't have a choice. It's about the maturity of development as well as anything else. So build over sewer down there, they have build over sewer with some conditions. But again, it's because of the level of development that occurs. Greenfields development, in every case, it is you don't build over sewer because you can build the sewer where it won't get built over. And we do the same. We're all in the same boat with that one because you do have the options. So our main issues, and all councils' main issues, are with primarily infill type developments.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So just in relation to those UDIA ones that you're going to do further work on, does that need further amendments to this policy? Because it would be disappointing if we had to wait 3 years for implementation to come back, if that was the case.
We can actually make changes to policy at any time. If they're insignificant, we don't have to bring it to the chamber. If they're significant, we do, but we don't have to wait for the renewal time. So if we find ourselves in a situation where we're encountering circumstances that are not necessarily covered by the policy, and we need to make some amendments, then we can do that at that time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Councillor Summerfield. I've got a bit of a line-up here. I'll have Councillor Shine, Councillor Carl, and then Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan. Please, Councillor Shine.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Phil, for your comprehensive report. The questions that were asked by Councillor Nancy were really my questions as well, but just that reassurance that the 3-year wait won't be around, that makes common sense and will be welcomed, I'm sure. But the other thing was in relation to the build over sewer. So just to explain to me as a layperson, but as I understood it, the reason for that was that it would, if a building was over a sewer, it would make it difficult to service it. But nowadays, the type of piping or the type of cleaning or whatever it is advanced such that you don't really have to be right on top of the break or whatever it might be. You can. Can you give us a little bit of practical knowledge about that?
Generally, where build over sewer happens, we will CCTV the sewer to see what condition it's in. If it's in poor condition, then we will condition it that it has to be replaced. So you're actually putting a brand new sewer line under the building, for starters. Where it's in reasonable condition or just past reasonable condition, we'll reline the sewer, subject to what material it is. If it's AC pipe, then we will get it replaced. But if it's PVC or it's VC and it's in reasonable nick, then we will reline it. So the inside of the pipe is basically new pipe as well. In terms of repairs, we do have technology now which does allow us to actually go down through a manhole and we can fix a break, as long as it's not misaligned, we can actually fix a break or a crack or something up to 90 metres diameter between manholes. Yep. And that is actually a resin patch that can be put on inside the pipeline. So we've got to have access to the line, obviously. And quite often when we say build over sewer, we will actually require them to put a manhole in as part of the process so that we can actually access under the building. So yeah, we've been using that for probably 18 months now, and the guys are becoming pretty good at it.
That's good. I think just a quick follow. In the case of somebody taking advantage of the infill encouragement that we're going through at the moment, and it is proposed to build a building which would partly go over an existing sewer line. You did the inspection and it had to be relined or replaced. Would that be at the applicant's expense or the council's, bearing in mind it was the council's sewer line to start with?
If it's a development, it will be at the developer's cost. If it is a mum and dad type situation, single residence, then council does it.
Thanks, Councillor Shine. Councillor Carl.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It's a good discussion to have, Phil. I know the meeting as recent as yesterday was a good one, and there'll be further discussion about some of these topics. And the one that comes to mind is the brownfield. Notwithstanding, there's the existing areas where we may look to do infill at a third of the cost of greenfield development because of existing infrastructure. But in future greenfield, where we identify major future centres, it's an argument to re-prosecute. It's a chestnut that's been around for a while about the width of road and footpath verges, because Councillor Nancy's very astutely raised the issue, and with the increased demand for housing diversity from the state figures, there will be need for us to think creatively how we create a dual purpose verge in the future, where we can have a meaningful tree and some tree canopy cover and part of existing green space within these more highly dense or higher density areas of major activity centres into the future, and where it can be functional and carry future infrastructure in the verge, whether it be on the road or on the footpath, rather than have everything under buildings, which becomes a whole of life nightmare as far as whole of life maintenance. Having said that, notwithstanding the future discussions, and the tone I got from the recent meeting that we will be definitely having those and bringing those forward in a timely manner to try and facilitate things as council and the industry. But I just want to compliment Damien, yourself and Phil, the team, all the team, for actually bringing these forward comprehensively as part of a review, and particularly in a time as such as this. So I'd just like to publicly say thank you, as it gives some clarity for all parties concerned. So thanks, guys.
Much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Bell, and we should say that we are catching up with Derg next week, I think, Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan. Yep.
Thank you, General Manager Platts, and thanks, Councillor Carl. I have Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan and then Councillor McMahon.
Oh, well, Councillor Carl just stole my, what I was going to say. I was going to just say thank you, because it has been a bugbear for a really long time, the build over sewer stuff, and getting clarity on that. And I was going to just urge you to speak to our Development Industry Reference Group in future. The paragraph or the sentence that was left out, was that just an oversight?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
just an oversight. It came about because what was in there was very legalistic in the way it was worded. So we tried to simplify the language, and along the way, somehow or other, that particular paragraph got missed. So I'm very glad that UDIA spotted it, and it was with relation to single-storey dwellings that aren't development-driven, that is, you know, a family where council picks up the cost. So it would have been quite an impact if it hadn't have been picked up.
Thanks, Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you, Chair. Look, my first question was, I hope this is a lot of scientific, technical stuff here. I hope industry's been consulted. It's really good to hear that they have, and I appreciate that. Thank you for all of the work you've put in. There's a fair bit here, so well done to you and your team again. I hope I'm not going down a bit of a rabbit hole, but I had a question around sort of gravity-fed and water pressure and those kind of things, and it's similar to the ones in the next item as well when we talk about, you know, most of West Toowoomba, but and so you've got water and wastewater and sewage, so this is talking about water connection, and in attachment 1, the highlighted part 4.8.3, the connection of a water main network can be made prior to on maintenance. Any request to undertake connections must include successful pressure and bacterial testing. So I just want to talk about successful pressure testing. This is me, someone who lives on the bottom of a hill I think it's a gravity main, and if you turn it on at the wrong time, not much comes out. And how we work with successful pressure testing, noting in attachment 6, your addendum to the water supply, in that 2.5.3.3 minimum service pressure, you have it all spelled out there. Is gravity-fed water mains causing us issues around water pressure for a larger Toowoomba area? And is there a better way of doing that, and is that something that we're looking to move on from in the future?
I'll attempt to enhance this, but it's probably something that I might get Toby to have a chop at as well. But the supply of water in Toowoomba is primarily gravity. There is, I don't think there's any pressure, any uplift pump stations or relift pump stations for the water supply at all. What you find is that the people who are closer to the reservoirs will get lower pressure. And in fact, in some instances, we actually have trickle flow arrangements, which is they will have a tank and we will give them a supply that we can give them, and they will work from the tank with a pump because they will be too close to a reservoir to get any height differential at all. Fortunately, it's the exception, not the rule. The pressure that we work to, the pressure range, Toby, that we work to? 22 to 80 metres, yeah. And if you do have 22 metres, then it would look, it wouldn't be fantastic pressure, but it's pressure to drive everything and is suitable. But unfortunately, some people, as I say, if they're sitting next to a 10 metre high reservoir, they've only got 10 metre head, and that's when the reservoir's full. So yes, you do have issues with that. In terms of having relift pump stations, we don't, you would actually have to have the water flow downhill and then pump it back up again to give the people any pressure, which sort of, it can be done. Is it worth doing, would be the question. Is it economically feasible for council just to give somebody some extra pressure, which can be done by another mean? Again, a question that could be looked into. But yeah, that's our situation within council area at the moment. Is we do have people who are on trickle feed. They do pay a different rating base for that because it's not full service. But the majority of people are on gravity. I'm in a situation personally where we had to put a pressure reducing valve on because we actually blew up all our taps all the time. Having said that, we do have a series of pressure zones throughout council, through the council area, to try and actually, I guess, moderate. We'll never get equal pressure right across council area, but it is to moderate it to within that zone that Toby mentioned, the 22 to 80 metres. I'm not sure if that answers your question, councillor, but...
Yeah, it does. And I suppose it ties into what you're saying as we move forward. There's a lot of hilly country that's going to have houses on, and it's going to be the same sort of idea of gravity-fed mains and just the issues that go along with them. And you could have horrible water and the next door neighbour's got, you know, free flowing. I just thought, is that still industry standard, and we're happy to continue with that?
It may change over time. It may be that we do have to put brake tanks in and relift. It'll be subject to the situation at any given point in time. So we may see developers eventually start to come in saying, well, look, the pressure by the time we get to the top of this hill is just non-existent. We want to build a relift pump station. So I wouldn't rule it out.
Thanks, Councillor McMahon. Thank you, Phil. And, any other questions, councillors? Those councillors who haven't had a chance to speak yet or ask questions, anything else you'd like to raise? Phil, just one from me. Those issues that have been raised, you know, the 2 stories and the sewerage RAL work that you said was going to be reviewed in conjunction with planning and development. Do you have any idea about the timelines for that to come back? Because I imagine that they are significant and they would come back to council, so the timelines for those reviews to be complete.
The build over for the 2 stories we've already started discussions on. The RAL is a much larger issue because it does involve potential legislation changes. We may be able to do something through development planning, and as I said, I've had some early discussions with Adam Gould, and Damitha and Michael have certainly been working with the development engineering and development planning guys in having those discussions as well. We have a history where we did put conditions in at RAL stage, but unfortunately when it got to development planning, because there's nothing actually on the block, there's nothing actually there at that stage to condition, development planning couldn't process it and couldn't put it through. That was the legislation. So that one I think is going to be somewhat longer term. I'd like to think that with the two-storey stuff, we can have that sorted in the next 6 months. The RAL, I'm sorry, that one I can't give you a timeline on.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you, Phil. So, councillors, we have a recommendation. It's in two-part. That firstly, the council will adopt the updated 2.03 Water Infrastructure Policy Attachment 2 and related addendums and codes of practice, and part 2, council adopt the updated 2.04 Wastewater Infrastructure Policy Attachment 4 and related addendums and codes of practice. Do I have somebody who'd like to move that? Councillor Summerfield, and a seconder, Councillor McDonald, Mayor McDonald. All of those in favour? That is carried unanimously. Thank you. Thank you very much, Phil.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you very much, councillors.
We'll go on to item number 4 on the agenda. So we're being joined by Toby Milliken, who's the Principal Engineer Network Planning, and Jake Passier. This item is the Greater Western Toowoomba Water Supply Study. Over to you, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, councillors. So this report is to present the findings and recommendations of the Greater Western Toowoomba Water Supply Study Planning Report that was completed in 2023, and it's to seek endorsement on the outcomes of this report by council. So the study area encompasses a large area of Toowoomba, in really general terms, west of Tor Street and Anzac Avenue, and also includes the suburbs of Glenvale, Torrington, Cotswold Hills, and then Charlton, Wellcamp and Westbrook. This is the largest supply area in the region, and it accounts for approximately 30% of the total consumption within the Toowoomba bulk water supply area. There are also other water supply zones and towns connected off this, this area, and when that demand's also incorporated, it accounts for approximately 70% of the total demand. So it services a very large area of Toowoomba's water supply. So existing deficiencies within the network are generally related to high pressure or fire flow deficiencies. And to rectify these, we're proposing to have pipe augmentations and some pressure zone realignments. There was also an area of low pressure at Wilson and Heights that was identified, and there's a new booster zone proposed to ensure that council's standards of service are achieved in this area. I suppose this is what Councillor McMahon was referring to before, where we've got, in this case, an area that's quite high in elevation, and what we see is a pressure drop during peak demand. So in order to be able to rectify that and ensure that council's standards of service are maintained, we need to look at pumps to be able to boost the pressure in that area. So to rectify the existing deficiencies in the network, the total augmentation cost is estimated at $5.9 million. Future augmentations are then required to meet increased demand caused by future population growth. So this includes major augmentations by 2036, in particular to the Western Trunk Main, so from the Mount Connock Water Treatment Plant down into Toowoomba and along Tor Street. This is estimated at a cost of $37 million. There are also upgrades to increase the capacity to supply Westbrook at a cost of $11.2 million. By 2061, which is the last planning horizon in the study, further augmentations are required within Charlton, Westbrook, and also a further extension of the Western Trunk Main at a total cost of $14.1 million. Growth rates have been adopted based on the information available at the time that the study was undertaken. We realise that the new growth projections model was released in July 2023, which has occurred since this study, or the outcomes of the study were determined. We have done a bit of an analysis on the differences in the growth projections between what we had originally determined and the growth model, and we've found that it's actually quite a similar growth rate. So we're actually approximately 10% higher growth than what the growth model has. So from that point of view, the new growth model, the outcomes of this study are still relevant for those new population growth numbers. So this study was also undertaken before the announcement of the Toowoomba to Warwick pipeline, and as you would all be aware, there is now the Southern Water Treatment Plant proposed to service Westbrook as well as some of the southern suburbs of Toowoomba. And so we now have an alternate water servicing strategy for that area of Toowoomba. So that proposal is going to have an impact on the outcomes of the work proposed within this study. So to look into that further, Water and Waste Services Group are in the process of undertaking a water and sewerage servicing strategy for the Greater Toowoomba area. That's going to be specifically focused on future trunk infrastructure requirements, including the integration of the Southern Water Treatment Plant into the Toowoomba bulk water supply network. And it will also assess the impacts of growth contained within the current growth model that was finalised in July 2023. Once completed, the proposed trunk infrastructure will then supersede the works proposed within this study.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Toby. Councillors, any questions? Councillor McMahon?
I would let someone else go first, but happy to as well. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Toby. Yeah, I did have some. This is a great lot of work. Thanks for everything you've done. I did have some questions similar to last time. So, when I had my whinge about where I live is low pressure, and then I learnt that 22 to 80 is the standard, and that we're spending $1.1 million because old mate's got too much pressure in the Kynoch zone. So this is well above 80, blow your taps off sort of stuff, is it, that we're looking to reduce?
Yes, that's correct, Councillor McMahon. So it obviously depends on exactly where, like the pressure fluctuations do occur, like Phil was saying in the last agenda item. In the Glenvale area in particular, pressures are getting up towards 120 plus metres, so substantially above council's maximum. As you get higher pressure, there's a higher risk of main breaks, there's a higher risk of water loss, and so when we start thinking about non-revenue water, for example, and trying to minimise that, that's one of the reasons why we look at trying to keep that pressure within a set range. I suppose having said that, this report shows the infrastructure that's needed to make sure that the pressure does fall within council service standards, and we get a schedule of works come out of that. We then need to look through and prioritise those works. So where we're not meeting fire flow requirements or people don't have enough water pressure, that would generally be given a higher priority than where there's too high pressure. But like I was saying before, you do get that big range of pressures. So like if it's just over 80, it would be quite a low priority. But if we're getting very, very high pressure, it's a high priority.
When I read that last night, I was like, Jesus, high pressure sounds like Christmas and you're getting rid of it. But I understand. So right out to 2061, and congrats for looking that far into the future, there was 11.8 mil for a 2.1k replacement Victory Street to Queen Street. I suppose, and I think I read somewhere in the report that that's today's dollars as well, so that's not indexed to what it might cost in 2061. Knowing nothing about the cost to build trunk mains, 11.8 mil for 2Ks, is that fairly standard pricing?
So it depends on the size of the main and the complexity of construction. So in this circumstance, so you're correct there, today's dollars, that's actually 2022 dollars. We probably expect in the last 12 months there's going to be quite an increase in that as well. So this is the Western Trunk Main. So it cuts through from Mount Kynoch down, crosses the bypass, crosses Hermitage Road and the bypass, and then runs up and along Tor Street. So we actually have quite a congested corridor along there. So we've got, it's obviously it's a main road. Right. It's a large diameter pipe. I think there's overhead power. There's all sorts of services along there. So in terms of the construction difficulty, it's very high, and that's why that is reflected in that cost.
Sure. So, thanks for that. When you go to the financial implications part of the report, we're looking at in 2036, and I suppose this highlights the idea that just how much of the rate base goes to keep fresh, clean water coming out of your taps. 2036, we're looking at $51 million in 2022 numbers, so it could be a heck of a lot more by 2036 to upgrade the water. So that's a fair whop of cash to any council. And do we look then at staggering that over a number of years, or is that already in the forward plan, or how do those conversations start from here?
It's certainly how we look at the capital works program. We look at 5-year increments in these planning studies. So when we say 2036, the infrastructure needs to be in the ground by 2036, based on the growth projections that we've currently adopted. So, I mean, by 2036, this will have been reviewed again, and in terms of the trunk infrastructure, we're actually just starting that process to look at the whole bulk supply together rather than individual water supply zones. So it does get reviewed regularly, and the timing will be adjusted accordingly, depending on whether it needs to be brought forward or pushed back, and obviously costs and so forth will be updated at that point. But yes, we do need to spread that out over time. A lot of that money as well is tied up in the Western Trunk Main and supply to Westbrook, and both of those items are influenced by the Southern Water Treatment Plant. So when we're looking at the cost of that and needing to be in by the early 2030s, that potentially changes the timing of when that infrastructure proposed in 2036 would actually need to occur.
Yeah, good answers. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Toby. Thanks, Councillor McMahon. I have Councillor Summerfield and then Councillor Carl.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Toby. So the 5.9, which is the existing, is that currently in our budget for this financial year? Are you planning on doing those works this financial year?
So it's not all currently in the capital works plan. So we have 2.1 million of that 5.9 is currently listed. So we have the Wilson and Heights booster pump station, which would probably be listed as the most critical of those items. So it's currently scheduled to start in the 2024-25, so next financial year, with completion by 2025-26. And then we also have $1.2 million for a trunk main through to the Glenvale Reservoir for 25-26. So they're the two current items, which is obviously less than half of what we're currently proposing. So we'd have to look at how and when we incorporate that into the program. But we obviously are aware that it's quite a constrained capital works program.
So what I'm trying to clarify is, do you need any additional funding in this current financial year for the works that you plan on doing this financial year?
So it sort of it comes down to the prioritisation of those works. So a lot of that money is, the proposed money for these works is tied up in reducing that high pressure. So if council is happy to maintain slightly higher pressure than what we would prefer, then it doesn't need to be done immediately. And that's where we'd look at expanding that out. What the existing scenario does, it highlights where we don't meet those current standards of service. It doesn't mean that it's absolutely essential that all of that work be done this current financial year.
Okay, so do I read from that you don't need any additional funding for this current financial year? Because if you do, we need to change the recommendation.
If I may, Councillor, my response to that question is water and waste services would always like to receive additional funding. But the reality of our current situation, as Councillor is very aware, is the dam project is a considerable financial challenge that needs to be completed, and managers and council staff are working very closely together to look across not just the water and waste portfolio, but across all businesses to come up with an appropriate solution for that very issue that will be raised to the executive leadership team in the coming weeks. So what I'd say is that for now we have sufficient enough funds to deal with the highest priority issues that we have. notwithstanding that there are significant issues across all networks, not just water and sewerage, that need to be considered when we make those decisions around where capital funding goes.
Okay, so you won't be coming, if council endorses this under the current recommendation before us today, it won't mean that you'll be coming back before the end of the financial year asking for more money.
It is not my intention at this stage to come back to council and cite this report and recommendation within the report for why funding needs to be attributed to this financial year. BR1 is close, approaching, and as a result of that, any of those changes relating to the capital program will be incorporated in that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Summerfield. Councillor Carl.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Damien and guys, for the report again. And it's a good one, and it's a very significant and timely one, particularly the area and the draw area from that immediate western area of Toowoomba water supply. I note on page, doesn't give a page, but in board books 1850 of 1975, in the executive summary on the second page there, this is where it really becomes critically important for us. It is recommended that proposed works identified in Appendix G be adopted into Council's Capital Works Program and all trunk infrastructure listed in Section 10 be included in future revisions of the LGIP, and also the paragraph ahead where the service priority for the priority infrastructure area be provided as well in the next 10 to 15 years. This is where it is critically important for us to strategically plan. But the variance, of course, to that is, you know, a percentage of that trunk infrastructure will entirely depend on when developers choose to bring land to the market and build those sections of trunk, and how we have to then offset that at the other end after they deliver that as part of their development front. And then the affordability issue of how many development fronts we can have under the current financial constraints and financial model that we have from the state around being able to recoup costs with a cap on infrastructure charges versus the cost of delivering those in today's climate. But hats off to you, because that is a strategic view and gives a roadmap, a very clear roadmap for development in the future, and for those proponents who own land and wish to invest, at least they've got a clear roadmap to run by. So thanks very much, guys.
Thanks, Councillor Carl. Councillor Melissa Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I will reiterate the words of my colleagues. Congratulations, a very in-depth report. Though I must admit, probably one of a reoccurring theme that I got throughout the whole report was, here's the report, but this was written before the Toowoomba to Warwick pipeline, before the Southern Water Treatment Plant, and we don't know what's happening with Inland Rail, because we actually don't know what's happening with Inland Rail now. So my question is, how, and I'm just trying from a strategic perspective going forward, how often will this be revisited? Because this is obviously a baseline now, and I think you've said that. I don't know, I've got so many annotations here, I can't remember which page it was on now, but it was said in there that this will now create a baseline report, and then when all of those projects come online, it will be revisited. So are we looking at it, a revisit every 3 years or 5 years, or as Councillor Carl just suggested, as and when land comes to market? Just so I've got some sort of clear direction in my head.
Thank you, Councillor. That's a fantastic question, and I'd like to give Toby an opportunity to answer this, but first I'd say he's doing some exceptionally I guess, a leading work in the industry in this space. So rather than setting a defined time frame around certain things, there's a number of things that we are considering when making these decisions. I'll hand over to Toby to go on from there.
I suppose just as a starting point, the last time that this study was done was 2014. So it's actually taken us 9 years to be able to get around to doing this again. So from a resourcing point of view, it's very difficult to get through all these studies in a timely manner. So what we've done over the past few months is we engaged AECOM to do a study for us on looking at the prioritisation of our water supply study areas. So we've got 43 water and sewage networks combined that we need to go through. So if, particularly the smaller areas, if we had someone that was just dedicated to them, might take 3 to 4 months to do each one. So you can sort of imagine how long it takes to get through them all. So the prioritisation assessment is looking at, I suppose, the frequency for how often we should be doing each of these. So looking at the growth projections for each of those study areas and capital works that are upcoming capital works are two of the really key factors that we're considering in that. And so that we've actually just got the final model of that through this month. So we'll look at bringing that to council to do an information session to sort of explain our process going forward. But areas where we have high growth and high expenditure coming up, we want to try to prioritise over, let's say, for example, maybe Cecil Plains has got no capital works, has quite a lot of capacity in the network, just as an example. We don't need to do that every 3 years. We need to do areas such as, Westbrook might have very high growth, or Cambodia, or somewhere like that, and that needs to be done more often as a result. So we're trying to have a bit more of a strategic view on how often we review these studies.
Thank you. And again, thank you for such an incredible report. But I can't help but think how many competing priorities we have in our organisation and across our region. We've got water, feels like water, water, water. And then we've got roads, 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 and there's parks, and there's just so many competing priorities. It's such a difficult area, isn't it? So priorities going forward, hey?
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Any other questions? Councillor McDonald.
Thanks very much, Chair. Again, echoing the words of colleagues, a very extensive report, good report. The Wilsonton Heights one that you mentioned, Toby, going 24, 25, complete by 26, does that also service what will be the new hospital? Is that main, or is it a separate?
So Wilsonton Heights comes off it's just to the west of Greenwater Street, so the very top end, northern end of Greenwater Street. The Sanctuary Rise development. So up in there, and some of the, I suppose, slightly older areas in that vicinity. So it sits up above where the new hospital is going. The hospital itself, Bailey Henderson, is down the hill quite a lot. So it's actually quite high pressure down there. As I'm sure you're aware, Hog Street's quite steep going up there. So you get quite a massive pressure differential from the bottom of the hill to the top.
If I could just to follow up, the growth of housing in that area, particularly if you think of Palm Lakes, I guess, from a water pressure and supply and what have you, that would obviously wouldn't have been known in 2014 to where you are now. So I'm encouraged by the new approach of actually looking at these areas separately, given need. So yeah, no need to comment on that. That's logical. But just thanks for the report.
Thank you, Mayor. Any other questions? No? Okay, thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. May I have someone move the recommendation, which is that Council endorse the Greater Western Toowoomba Water Supply Study Planning Report, May 2023, and the report be used in the formulation of future capital works plans and informing the local government infrastructure plan. A mover for that, please. Councillor Summerfield and Councillor Melissa Taylor. All of those in favour? It's carried unanimously. Thank you. So we'll call the end of the water and wastewater meeting for September at 12:41. Thank you, General Manager Platts, Jake, Toby. Thanks very much.
Councillor, I was just trying to
everyone, and welcome to the Infrastructure Committee meeting of the Toowoomba Regional Council for September 2023. I acknowledge our portfolio lead, Councillor Melissa Taylor. Welcome to the Mayor, Councillor, CEO. There isn't anyone else here. And having said that, I'd like to thank everyone who's in the room today and everyone who's watching via Council's social media platforms. We do not have any items on the agenda for the September meeting, and so therefore I'll close the meeting. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.